So, good morning and welcome to this seminar arranged by IFN, the Research Institute of Industrial Economics. We are living in a time of fascinating contradictions. On the one hand, a level of education, information, and science never seen before, and on the other hand, politics that seem to be getting more primitive by the hour, almost. And some call it post-truth politics. I think it was the magazine The Economist who coined the phrase. And we've seen this in the Brexit campaign, where one of the catchphrases was, this country has had enough of experts. And we see it in America, where Donald Trump appears more authentic the further he gets from law, reason, and facts. And if you are an economist or a journalist, you have plenty of reasons to be nervous, I think. But if you are a social psychologist, your expertise will be badly needed for a long time to come. And today we are proud to introduce the most prominent of them all, who has given us new insights with his brilliant book, The Righteous Mind. Why are good people so divided by politics? How can moral psychology help us understand the kind of populism that we have just seen, for instance, in the Brexit verdict? So a warm welcome to the professor at New York University's Stern School of Business, Jonathan Haidt.
Well, thank you, Nicholas.
How does it feel to be in Sweden and Europe in these turbulent times?
It's quite exciting. It's kind of like, suppose you were to plan a vacation to Hawaii because you love surfing, and then it turns out, you're looking forward to it for many months, and then it turns out there's a giant monsoon about to pass through, and the waves are going to be 3 times as high. It's like, wow, this is exciting.
You thought it would be calm waters in Europe as opposed to the
Yes, I did.
US.
Yes.
The New York Times, they called your book a landmark contribution to humanity's understanding of itself. Have you noticed any manifestations of that new understanding among, say, American or British politicians?
Well, what I have noticed is that, of course, so in America, political campaigns have been very focused on using everything they can from the social sciences since the 1990s. And so I do sometimes hear some of the language in the book in political appeal. So I know that all the political consultants in Washington have read the book. I wrote the book hoping that people could then better understand themselves, become more tolerant, and understand the other side. Unfortunately, what mainly happens is consultants try to weaponize it. They try to use this to beat the other side more effectively.
Okay, that's not entirely surprising, perhaps.
No, but I do hear from many people who say, thank you, now I can understand my brother-in-law who I used to hate. Things like that.
It worked for me too, I can tell you that. So we were scheduled to talk about perceptions of capitalism actually today, but now we will focus more on Brexit and populism.
That's right.
Which is most timely, I think. And after your lecture, we'll have a panel discussion, including hopefully Minister Aida Hadzialic. She's about to arrive, I think. Professor Magnus Henrekson, and my fellow writers, Johan, Hakelius, and Lotta, Gröning as well. So, Professor Haidt, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure and honor to be visiting you here, to have such an audience, such a diverse audience, and to be able to talk about the issues that I think we're all thinking about these days. The 19th century was a century in which there were a lot of engineering challenges. The 20th century as well, things got a little more complicated socially. But I think now the problems that we're facing in our societies now are almost all human and psychological problems. What I mean is that even economic problems increasingly are not technical problems for economists to solve. They are social problems about how people react to things. And so this is the talk that I was planning on giving. This is research for a book that I'm writing on capitalism and morality, capitalism and moral psychology. But it seems as though all anybody wants to talk about since last Friday is this. And not just that, but more broadly, these sentiments all over Europe, and not just all over Europe, but in America. We have very much the sense in America that our politics has gone insane. It was terrible for a long, long time, and then it just got much, much worse. So what on earth is going on? And there's a strange sense in which I think, I don't know, I feel sort of like more of a kinship around the world now. It's like we've worshipped democracy for so long, and suddenly we're all having problems with it, or at least it's behaving in ways that we hadn't anticipated. That's not necessarily a problem, but it certainly feels that way now. So this is my new title, What the Hell is Happening to the Western Democracies? And I'm going to try to show that I think moral psychology can help us understand a lot of what's going on. So clearly, it has to do with economics, globalization, deindustrialization. So much has been written about these trends around the world, and they often focus or begin with economics, with the loss of what you might call low-skill, medium-wage jobs. So working class white people in America, working class people at industrial jobs, they're the big losers of globalization, and they are prime recruits for right-wing populist parties. So there is some truth to that, but what I'd like to say, the theme of my talk today is that actually moral psychology tends to be more powerful than economics. You can see that in this simple slide. This is British election survey data, and it shows on the x-axis to what degree do you think the death penalty is appropriate. People who strongly agree that the death penalty is appropriate are very likely to prefer to leave the EU. And this is data from just a few months ago. So death penalty attitudes strongly predict attitudes towards Brexit. If you oppose to the death penalty, then only a 0.2 chance, only 20% chance that you want to leave. So that's a very, very big effect. Now, what are those lines? Well, the green line is high-income people. The blue line is low-income people. And as you can see, rich people are slightly less likely to want to leave than lower-income people. And this is only white people, not immigrants, just white. I don't know how they do it, but at any rate, the point is that income, the general story is that the working class, they're the ones who want to leave. And it's true that there's an effect there, but it's small compared to the gigantic effect of a moral attitude towards the death penalty. That swamps the economic factor. So let's talk about moral psychology. My book, The Righteous Mind, was my attempt to synthesize everything we know about human morality and how to think about it. This is the original hardcover in the United States. In the UK, they have a different publishing company, different art department. They came up with this title, which is cover, which I rather like. And then in the United States, I helped design this one to capture the sense of polarization, of good versus evil, of demonization. So the book is basically 3 principles. If you understand these 3 principles, then you understand moral psychology. And I'm going to go through each of them, and for each one, I'll show how it can be helpful in understanding what's happening in democracies around the world. So intuitions come first, strategic reasoning second. And I can summarize a lot of research with this simple formulation. Thinking is for doing. We reason not necessarily to find the truth. We reason to find justification for the things that we want to do or say in order to persuade others. Reasoning is very social. It's not just a cognitive thing we do to find the truth. And so system 1, our intuitive system, tends to drive system 2, our conscious verbal system. And so this very simple formulation, if we want to believe a proposition, we don't say, well, what's the evidence for it, what's the evidence against it? We say, can I believe it? And then we try to construct a case. And if we can construct a case, then we can stop thinking, because if someone challenges us, we have backup. We have reasons we can give. And if we don't want to believe it, we ask the opposite question. Must I believe it? Must I believe that Brexit will be bad for the British economy, as all the experts are telling me? Must I believe it? Well, no. Here's an economist who said it would actually be good in the long run. So all you need is to find one piece of evidence to support, and then you're done. So this is the way reasoning works, especially about moral issues. So I'll just show you two experiments briefly. These are covered in the book, but I'll just briefly summarize them. So there's a long line of research on motivated reasoning. In one study, subjects come into the lab. These are students in an introductory psychology class in the United States. And they are given an article. It looks like an article in Science. And it shows that caffeine consumption is associated with breast cancer. And you're a student in a psychology class, you're learning about experimental methods, and you're asked, what do you think of this study? Is it a good study? Who do you think finds a lot of flaws in that study? What do you think? Caffeine consumption is associated with breast cancer. Coffee drinkers? So coffee drinkers don't like it. All coffee drinkers? Women who drink coffee find a lot of flaws in that study because they start saying, must I believe it? I don't want to believe this. Must I believe it? And they can find, well, the sample size maybe wasn't big enough. So they're very critical and they can reject it. But men or women who don't drink coffee say, oh, okay, I didn't know that. All right, I guess coffee causes breast cancer. So the point is, this is why scientific studies generally do not persuade people on any vaguely politicized topic, because we ask ourselves, must I believe it? And if you don't want to believe the scientific study, it's very easy to find a way out. Here's another study. Subjects come into the lab, they have to watch a computer monitor, and they're paid, let's say it's a nickel, 5 cents, every time a letter flashes up on a screen. All kinds of things flash up. You have to press a button within half a second every time a letter flashes up. And so with those criteria, what do you think that is? The thing I just put up on the screen. Did you see it? What was it? A B. Okay, so if you're paid a nickel every time you see a letter, when that flashes up, you're going to press your button because that's a B. But half the subjects were paid a nickel, 5 cents, every time a number flashed up. And they see that as a 13. Now, it's important to note, nobody saw it as a Q or a 9 or an asterisk. People are not crazy. When there is ambiguity, we see what we want to see. Now, who can name for me a major controversial moral, political, economic matter on which there is no ambiguity? Hands up? Okay, there's always ambiguity. So all the things we argue about are ambiguous things in which people can see what they want to see. So when we're talking about populism, post-truth politics, whatever it is you want to talk about, don't expect arguments to persuade. That's just not the way the mind works. Well, what does persuade? My claim in the book is that intuitions come first, and then we reason. So what are these intuitions? What are the intuitions you can appeal to? That's part 2 of the talk and of the book. And my early research was on what are the taste buds of the moral sense, because morality has this really fascinating aspect in which it's different in every society and in many in subgroups in society. It's different, but it's not wildly and unconstrainedly different. It's variations on a theme. It's more of this or less. So how do you make sense of that? And so much of humanity is like that. Language is like that. Art is like that. Music is like that. And so from reading a lot of anthropology and doing a little bit of field work, my conclusion with my colleagues is that there are 6 really good candidates for being the taste buds of the moral sense. So care, harm, those sorts of concerns, that clearly is innate. We are mammals. And what does it mean to be a mammal? It means that we bear our young live, which means we nurture and nurse them for a long, long time, which means it's not just the female body that is adapted for child rearing, it's the brain, and not just the minds of women, but also of men, because human males give a lot of parental care. So we are designed for care and nurturing. And this system is very clearly evident typically in left-wing moral appeals, left-wing moral movements. These are photos I took at Occupy Wall Street. Compassion is our new currency. I can't hurt another without hurting myself. You never see stuff like this at Tea Party rallies or right-wing rallies. They love their children and their dogs, but the politics is not based on this foundation. The second foundation is fairness and cheating. Now, everybody uses this, values fairness. But here's the key thing. On the left, it tends to be more fairness as equality, often linked with compassion. Again, Occupy Wall Street, marching for the meek and weary, the hungry and homeless. Tax the wealthy, fair and square. Everyone believes in fair taxes. But on the left, if there are hungry people, then taxes are not high enough on the rich. We need to tax them more so that we can relieve suffering. But on the right, they don't generally see equality of outcome as a thing to be desired. They see fairness as proportionality, and that means no free riders, slackers, or cheaters. If you think of the law of karma, if you are lazy, you should suffer. And if the government bails you out, then the universe is out of whack. It's out of alignment. So you see this in right-wing appeals. So, for example, migrants take all new jobs in Britain, and they go to the front of the housing queue. So again, cheating. If a group is charged with cheating, being slackers or free riders, that's a good argument to organize against them. Third foundation, liberty oppression, certainly the founding myth, the founding story of my country. But you see it everywhere to some extent. So obviously in the Leave campaign, it was front and center. Let's take back control. It is bad to have foreign governments, foreign powers telling us what to do. The fourth foundation, loyalty and betrayal. Now there are a number of animals that can work together cooperatively, but they are always siblings. Wolf packs are siblings, they're closely related. There's only one creature on Earth that can work together in large groups that are not related. Of course, that's humanity. And I think there's a lot of evidence that we evolved for war. We evolved for violent intergroup conflict. It's deep, deep in us, and we love it so much that we invented sports. There's no other explanation for sports other than that it's play war. And if you doubt that, just look not on the field, look in the stands. We love to get together and do the tribal thing. Even in a super advanced egalitarian nation like Sweden, you guys still love it. Fifth foundation, authority subversion. Part of being a primate is also being hierarchical. Almost not all, but most of the primates are hierarchical. We've got hierarchy deep within us, as you can see by the displays of deference in two closely related species up there. But this foundation tends to be accepted much more strongly on the right. And again, I should say, when I say the right, I mean the social conservatives. I know in America, we screwed up the word liberal. You guys use it correctly. Liberal means liberty markets. I don't mean them. I mean social conservatives when I say the right. So a photo from a church near my old home in Charlottesville, Virginia. God's in charge, so shut up. It's, it's intended a bit tongue-in-cheek, but you would never say that in a left-wing, sort of a Unitarian congregation. On the left, however, authority is automatically bad. Authority is bad. You should subvert authority. Nations are bad. Gods are bad. All of those things are bad. They reject this foundation, this moral foundation. The last foundation, the most mysterious for secular academic types, is sanctity and degradation. So images of chastity and purity, the idea that there's something pure or sacred that must be guarded, protected from degradation, desecration. So in the Christian tradition, you see it especially around sexuality and female sexuality. This is an image of the Virgin Mary, the Madonna, with her chastity being guarded. Now I'll show you a very different Madonna with a different moral valence. So this Madonna was much more popular on the left because on the left, chastity is oppression, chastity is bad. You should celebrate female sexuality. There should be no constraints or restraints or controls on it. A photo I took at Occupy Wall Street, nothing is sacred. I have no idea what the sign maker intended by that, but you could never see such a sign at a right-wing social or political event. It just couldn't happen. So let's put it all together here. In the Brexit campaign, this is one of the many pro-Leave signs. Who really runs this country? 75% of our laws are now made in Brussels. This is a really powerful sort of a super stimulus. It brings in control, liberty and free, autonomy. Brussels is a threat to that. It talks about authority, illegitimate authority, oppressing us, and loyalty, the flag, and sacrilege. Burning the flag is a form of sacrilege. It's like a form of blasphemy. It's a very religious, counter-religious act. So just to show you a little bit of data on my website, yourmorals.org, we've had about 500,000 people come take our surveys. What we find is that people, when they come to the site and register as being very conservative or on the right, they give actually fairly high ratings to all of those foundations I just showed you. They include all of them as part of their morality. But when people say they're on the far left, they give the highest ratings of all to care, protecting victims, things like that. They also use fairness and liberty, but they reject loyalty, authority, and sanctity. Those are not moral values. Those are the foundations of racism and nationalism. So to apply this even more directly, we all live not in a world of 6 taste buds. We live in a world of a rich moral cuisine prepared for us by advertising agencies and political operatives. And so there are narratives that are created about political issues. That's part of what political parties are supposed to do. So in general, on the left, we find a narrative, and this is true across countries, we find a narrative in which immigrants are good. So first, you cross off those 3 foundations. We're not going to even draw on those 3. We're going to basically tell a story based especially on care. We need to protect and care for these very vulnerable and victimized people. And top of our minds must be fighting discrimination and Islamophobia. So this is generally the moral worldview that you'll find on the left about immigration, and this is why you see so many left-wing groups and actresses. This is Susan Sarandon and Hollywood, all the other sort of the left-wing intelligentsia are out there welcoming immigrants in. In America, there are groups that try to find Mexican immigrants who are crossing illegally in the desert and give them water and help them to break the law and enter the country, because that's compassion. And also you get a strong protest. This was just a week or two ago about Brexit being an act of violence, and what we all must do is organize to protect migrant rights the day after the Brexit vote. On the far right, it's very, very different. They use all 6 foundations, and there are strong notions of fairness. Low-skill immigration often is accompanied or includes people who are coming for the benefits. They're taking without giving. There are strong, powerful issues of national sovereignty, especially in Europe, where Brussels is going to tell your country how many you must take, or at least they try to. And then loyalty, authority, and sanctity tend to work together to support ideas of not just a sort of abstract nationalism, but a real sense that our land is sacred and has a sacred history, and we've got these traditions, and it all kind of weaves together into something that must be protected. And obviously, mass immigration is a direct threat to that sense of shared culture. You see this especially clearly. This was the SVP, a right-wing Swiss party from about 10 years ago, that really hit on all of those buttons right there with those 2 posters. So that's the second principle. There are 6 intuitive foundations of morality. The last one is that morality binds and blinds. Now here's the way to think about that. In nature, you do find some cases where animals can build gigantic structures, but they're always built by siblings. So the way nature gets large-scale cooperation is it puts them all in the same boat. They're all children of the same queen, the same mother. That's a giant beehive. This is about a 20-foot tall a termite colony in Australia. Again, all siblings. The only exception to that rule is humans. Humans also build gigantic structures. This is a reconstruction of Babylon and Tenochtitlan. You never find ancient civilizations without temples. Wherever you get civilization, you get temples first. You get sacredness. You get people coming together to worship the gods, and then they build other things around that. That's our trick. So the way it works for humans, we have this totally, totally unprecedented ability to make something sacred, and then we circle around it. I mean, literally, it feels right to literally walk in a circle around it, and then you're bound together. So these are, of course, Muslims at the Hajj circling around a rock in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca. A metaphor I like to use is that it's, if you remember from early physics classes, when you move a wire through an electrical field, it creates a charge. And Emil Durkheim actually used that metaphor, that social functions, social events create a social electricity that can then do some work. It doesn't have to be about God. We can make anything sacred. So the flag is sacred, and this is part of the rallying of men and women for war. Circle around the flag, and then we can fight together and give our lives for each other. But it's important to look at each group in society and always start by asking, what do they hold sacred? This is the key to understanding groups that are not yours. What do they hold sacred? And then, what does my group hold sacred? Because around that sacredness, you will find a ring of stupidity. You will find a ring of post-truth politics. It's not just something that they do. Your side does it too. So the 4 major psychological types that play out in Western politics are these, I believe. You always have a group on the left, the progressives, and they have a particular psychology. It's very recognizable across cultures. Nowadays, they tend to focus on victims fighting racism. Of course, 100 years ago, it was more about workers' rights, things like that. But in the modern West, it tends to be those issues. There are 3 other psychological groups. The libertarians, we call them, you might call them liberals. They often will sacralize freedom and especially free markets, economic freedom. There are the status quo conservatives, the Burkean conservatives, who are very concerned about rapid change, and they tend to think the traditions in the country are sacred. And then there are the authoritarians, who are a little different from the status quo conservatives. Their focus is not that they're afraid of change, they're afraid of loss of cohesion, and those turn out to be very different. So now let's take a look at this in terms of what's sacred. For the progressives, I really love the World Values Survey. I won't go into it here. Many of you have seen this sort of graph. But what they find is that countries, as they develop, their values tend to move from this corner where all the poor countries, the Islamic countries, the African countries currently are. Countries tend to sort of move up towards secular rational values, and then they move to the right towards emancipative or freedom-loving values. And of course, Sweden is at the extreme, Denmark and Norway. So Scandinavia is at the forefront of the human experience in terms of new progressive freedom-loving values. There's a wonderful book by Christian Welzel, one of the authors of this research, and here's the great quote, here's the key quote. He says, "Fading existential pressures, that is, when countries like yours relieve the fear that you're going to die, relieve the fear that bad things are going to happen to you, you have a lot of security, there's a funny thing that happens to your values. It opens people's minds, making them prioritize freedom over security, autonomy over authority, diversity over uniformity, and creativity over discipline. But not evenly across the whole country. This shift happens first and much more strongly in the cosmopolitan capital cities and university towns. So here's proof of that from the Brexit, or demonstration from the Brexit campaign. This is an odd graph, but the way to look at it is, so on the x-axis, percent who want to leave the EU, and on the y-axis, more likely to think immigration enriches Britain's cultural life. So we're in regions of Britain that were very strongly for Brexit, they tend to have a negative view of immigrants. But as we go towards more pro-Remain side, these are the ones who wanted to remain, they also have a positive view of immigration. So that's the general trend line. But there's a gigantic, gigantic outlier, which is central London. Central London isn't even on the trend line. Very, very strongly want to remain, and very positive view of immigrants. But note that inner London is really, really different from outer London. So there are little dots that are completely transformed. The values of the people in these little centers are way, way out on that values graph. Very different from everyone else in their country. And this, of course, has very powerful effects, dividing countries. Now let's jump to the authoritarians. The authoritarians are very, very different. And the Brexit drama, the drama playing out in Europe and America now, is especially a fight to the death between the progressives and the authoritarians. So who are the authoritarians? There's an incredible book by Karen Stenner. She's a political scientist. She wrote this amazing book based on her doctoral research at Princeton. And then I think she, as far as I can tell, she had triplets and moved to Australia and is working in a think tank there, but has left the academic world. It's a shame because this book is incredible. I'll just give you a couple of quotes from it. Her finding, there's been so much written on authoritarianism, and most researchers agree it is a combination. You tend to find sort of moral, political, and racial intolerance all going together. Stenner's contribution is that her research shows that this is not a stable personality trait. It is a pattern that comes out only in some people and only when they perceive a normative threat. Normative as in the sense of what are the norms, the moral order of our society. When they perceive a threat to that society, they suddenly get racist, focused on stamping out dissent, willing to use unconstitutional means even to do so. So what are the normative threats? They are, she says, disobedience to group authorities or authorities unworthy of respect. In each case, it's as though these are people who are otherwise not racist or intolerant, but there's a button on their forehead. And if you push that button, bang, out come these more intolerant responses. So if they perceive widespread disobedience to group authorities, if they perceive nonconformity to group norms, if they perceive a lack or loss of consensus in group values, if they perceive diversity run amok, it's as though, so the point is, they're not being selfish. They actually are guardians of the moral order as they see it. And when this button gets pushed, they want to save the moral order from attack, from threat, from subversion. And how do you do that? Well, if you have immigrants coming to your country and then you have riots and cars lit on fire and all sorts of things like that, that's a really good way to push the buttons. If you have immigrant groups who demand or ask for, or if it's just that the progressives are giving them changes to our moral order to accommodate them, that's a really good way to push that button. And what happens then is you get a backlash. I'm not saying, obviously, things have changed in Sweden a lot in the last year, and I'm not saying it's all because of the authoritarians, but the authoritarians clearly were the first ones to be strongly triggered and to push for these widespread changes. So, quotes from Stenner, some amazing quotes from Stenner. She says, all the available evidence indicates that exposure to difference, talking about difference, and applauding difference are the surest ways to aggravate those who are innately intolerant. She says, paradoxically, it would seem that we can best limit intolerance of difference by parading, talking about, and applauding our sameness. Ultimately, nothing inspires greater tolerance from the intolerant than an abundance of common and unifying beliefs, practices, etc. Regrettably, nothing is more certain to provoke increased expression of these predispositions than multicultural education, non-assimilation. Basically, she says, assimilation is essential, and if you don't do assimilation, you're going to hyperactivate the authoritarians. So that's the 3 principles of moral psychology applied to what's going on, especially around immigration in our societies. I'll just finish up with a simple story. Here's how it goes. Here's what I see happening. Step 1, successful capitalism creates enormous prosperity, security, and this is what we have. Congratulations to the Nordic countries especially, but to all the Western countries for doing this. But once that happens, you inevitably attract mass immigration. There's a lot of poverty and chaos in the world. People want to come to countries that have prosperity and stability. At the same time, this prosperity and stability changes the values of the urban elite, making them very pro-immigration, making them want more immigration, making them opposed to assimilation. In America, the left says assimilation is cultural genocide. We can't ask people to assimilate. But if you do that, if you have high levels of immigration and a cultural elite saying, don't make them assimilate, and if you want them to assimilate, you're a racist, well, what happens? The authoritarians become hyperactivated. Well, the authoritarians are a minority, but when they attract the status quo conservatives and sometimes the libertarians, then they're a majority. And then we end up here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. About this Brexit referendum now, do you think that this moment will be perceived as a sort of a turning point for Western democracies, where
yes.
the elephant of emotion finally overtook the rider of reason, to use your metaphor?
Well, I would say that it will be a turning point, but I'm going to guess that you're on the left from the way you asked that question. Can I ask what color you're?
We're all on the left.
No, actually, I need to. Actually, okay. The reason is because I always get this question. Well, that's very good, Professor Haidt. But isn't it the case that our side is based on reason and their side is based on emotion? And I get that from both sides. Both sides are based on emotion. What I found empirically, what my colleagues and I found empirically, is that people on the right can understand people on the left. They're exposed to left-wing ideas, they understand it. People on the left cannot understand people on the right. They are not exposed to their ideas. They reject what little exposure they have. So it will be a turning point, but not because emotion finally overwhelmed reason. It'll be a turning point because the elite, and this is even true for the center right, the elite sort of cosmopolitan globalists who don't understand nationalism, tribalism, they dismiss it as racism. Those tensions have been simmering and building up all across the Western world. And at some point, they had to boil. And if the EU was this wonderful, amazing organization, and my God, why don't those stupid idiots see it, then I would be more sympathetic to your view. But since, as an American, I love Europe, but I find the EU to be a kind of a disturbing creation. So I can't say that the people who reject it are crazy, irrational people.
But this expression, post-truth politics, what you make of that? I mean, isn't there a kind of relativism that at least economists and journalists and diplomats have reason to be worried about?
So, yeah, I guess right. So 2 points. The first is that as I said, if you find what they hold sacred, you find them lying. Now, I shouldn't say lying. You find them saying things that are radically out of sync with truth. So on the left, political correctness is the commitment to not telling the truth. We can't, and I'm a social scientist. In the social sciences in America, and I think here in Europe, we cannot speak honestly about race, gender, or immigration. We just can't do it. So we produce studies that are not true. And we give an unbalanced perspective on what's going on. I think this is academic malpractice. So we have post-truth academics. Now, it's true that Donald Trump says things that are so untrue that there's no precedent in major American politics. So I'm not saying both sides do it the same amount. Donald Trump is uniquely
But isn't
new.
there a connection between post-truth academics and post-truth politics in that sense?
Yes, because the degree. So you always have this battle between the sort of the progressive side and the authoritarians, especially. That's always simmering, and depending on the pressure of it, you'll get more and more lies because the ends justify the means. If we're in an existential struggle against the racists, then of course we're going to stretch the truth. We've got to win the campaign. And so you get Project Fear, you get all sorts of things. So again, I'm not saying it's always equal, but I'm saying that the left doesn't understand that it is full of lies too, because it has sacred values. If you have sacred values, you're not honest.
Right. And you are currently a professor of ethical leadership. Mm-hmm. If you compare the way leadership is evolving, say, in business and in politics, what's your observation there from an ethical point of view?
Well, we're seeing a major drop in trust in all institutions, and leadership has to change for that reason. So older, more hierarchical or authoritative forms of leadership aren't going to work, especially with younger people. I think business leadership, as far as I can tell, is getting more ethical, both in America and in Europe. There was a lot of bad stuff in the financial sector, and regulations and public censure have had an effect. So I think leadership is getting better in the business world, and I don't think it's getting better in the political world. People are very smart, they're very competent, and it's not because they're bad people at all. The things they have to do have become so impossible.
Right. And about capitalism, why is it so moralized? Why does the perception of capitalism vary so much across different countries?
So what I'm really interested in is the ways that human beings, we evolved to live in small tribal groups. And we did that for over 1 million years. We're really good at it. And kids do it spontaneously. I assume you have gangs in Stockholm. Are there gangs? That's exactly what it is. So that's a very natural, normal way to organize yourselves into gangs. Somehow we've been able to create these liberal moral orders where strangers can live together with different values. That's an amazing achievement. Capitalism turns out to be bound up with that. Capitalism is the only system that can create wealth, that can raise people up. So capitalism creates liberal moral orders, but then, as I showed here, something about those liberal moral orders leads to taking actions that then undermine the liberal moral order. And so that's part of so politics is often about what kind of society we're going to have. And there are always some people who say, more change, more change, more change. We call those progressives. There are others who say, slow down, slow down, slow down. We call those conservatives. And so capitalism is always bound up with these questions. What's the role of government, the role of business, the role of the individual, the family?
But both scholars and politicians and people in general tend to be either fans or critics of capitalism. So why are we moving towards this increasing polarization when an educated society might be moving to the reasonable center?
Well, most people don't have very well-formed views on capitalism. And in America, most people are in the center, and 40% of people don't even vote. They're sort of political dark matter. But to the extent that people are politically active and informed for more than 100 years, maybe 150 years, one of the central polarizing things has been, are you on the left? That means you're anti-capitalist. Or are you on the right, which means you are generally more in favor of capitalism. Now, I think one of the biggest factors is that capitalism is extremely good at creating freedom and extremely bad at creating equality. It's very hard to get equality of outcomes, and of course that's why Sweden is unique, is that you had 100 years in which you had rising prosperity and actually decreasing inequality. But that's extraordinarily unusual, probably only possible in a small homogeneous society that has no feudal tradition. So there are important lessons for Sweden's future.
And in your book you make a distinction between wicked problems and tame problems. Yeah. The wicked being the ones where science is guided by emotion, like migration or global warming and so on. What's the solution to this polarizing wickedness? Is it surrender to gut feeling or suppression of gut feeling?
So this is the most useful concept I've encountered in the last year or two. I only encountered this actually after the book, but in some of my more recent writings, the concept of what's called a wicked problem. So many people think, wicked problem, that must be a really big problem, or even just a hard problem, but that's not what it means. There are many problems that just sit there and let you work on them. So the classic example is cholera in the 19th century, one of the biggest killers in modern history. And it was a technical problem. Once cities figured out how to create sewage lines and get fresh water, problem solved. It's an engineering problem. Very hard problem, but it just sat there and let the experts work on it. But as we get into the late 20th century, the problems are social problems where, as the experts approach it, they don't say, what's the problem? Okay, how can we solve it? They come with a pre-existing notion. The country is so racist that the problem is racism. Now, let's look at poverty. It's racial oppression. Or, on the right, it would be personal responsibility is what everybody needs, and the left is always attacking personal responsibility. Now, let's look at poverty. They're not taking responsibility for their kids. They're having kids out of wedlock. They're lazy. So a wicked problem is one in which the experts have a pre-existing frame. They then look at the problem through that frame. They see what they want to see, and then as they work on it, what happens is the more experts work on the problem, the further from solution we are, because now each side has so much research showing its solutions. The only solution to this problem, I believe, is you have to create institutions or systems within which experts can actually challenge each other. As individuals, we're all pretty stupid. But if you put us together in the right way, we can become brilliant. And this is what universities are supposed to do. And one of my main projects in America right now, if you go to, I have a website, heterodoxacademy.org, because in America, the universities always leaned left, which is not a problem. Leaning left is okay. 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio, that's fine. But when it becomes 10-to-1 or 50-to-1, as it is in sociology and anthropology and other departments, when there are no conservatives, when everybody's on the left, you get orthodoxy, you get groupthink. So I'm a sort of a classical liberal in some ways. I mean, just in the sense of believing that you have to focus on the institutions. And if you get the institutions right, they can correct for the flaws of the individuals. And that's what we're not doing anymore.
But would you agree that problems get more wicked with rising levels of education?
Yes.
When sort of everyone becomes an expert?
Exactly. That's part of it.
Is that a simple explanation for this lack of trust in traditional elites?
So if we simply ban education beyond 4th grade, our problems will get less wicked. Yeah.
Everyone would listen. You were drawn to politics out of frustration in 2004 when you witnessed the clueless John Kerry campaign for the presidency. Why did Kerry fail to connect with voters? What's the lesson there?
So I was always on the left. Since I was a teenager, I was very much on the left. And I was studying morality and how it varies across cultures. And I started noticing that this moral foundations theory was working pretty well for American politics, that the left and the right are like, sort of like West and East in some ways. And I thought George Bush was a terrible president, and I couldn't believe that Al Gore lost to him in 2000. And then when John Kerry lost also, when he should have won, I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I said, okay, that's it. I'm devoting my research to help the Democrats, because they don't know how to talk. They think that politics is like shopping. They keep saying, my program will give you 20% more benefits, so vote for us. That's not what politics is. That's what, if you're an economist, you might think that that's what politics is. But it's not that. It's much more like religion. And so the Democrats didn't, whereas Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and I don't know, maybe Vladimir Putin, I don't know, I haven't read his, but people who know how to appeal to these mystical yearnings of a people for greatness, okay, that's what the Democrats are just terrible at. Obama's much better. Obama is a great speaker, and in his campaign, he's a great campaigner. He had his soaring oratory, he really got it. But governing, he is not.
And if you look at a candidate like Hillary Clinton today, who's struggling, she's actually generating more antipathy than support.
That's right.
Is that also because she fails to connect on an emotional level? I mean, hasn't she read your book?
I'm sure that people on our campaign have read my book. But no, I will end up voting for her because Trump is so awful, I believe. She has none of Bill Clinton's strengths other than high IQ, and she has a variety of weaknesses. She's just not an effective politician, and she's widely disliked because she's also not trusted. And Bill Clinton, when he lied, you really believed him and liked him. But when Hillary lies, it just feels bad.
It's a good point. But what about this phenomenon, Trump? I mean, he's almost like a textbook illustration of your thesis that politics is about emotion.
Yes, I do agree.
But were you surprised to see him come this far?
Yes, I was surprised because, like everybody else, like all the other experts, last summer when Trump was rising, it was really clear. People started saying, "Isn't Trump just like Mussolini? Hitler?" And while there are some similarities to the kind of appeal, the psychology of it, there are some similarities, but as some experts pointed out, Trump is not at all that because he has no ideology. He doesn't stand for anything. So he can't be a fascist. He's not about bring the nation together to kill the, it's but we all thought, okay, he's going to appeal to the authoritarians. But that's what, 30%? That at most, that's not 50%. And so we were all surprised when he won so strongly in the Republican field. And there was a few weeks where we thought, oh my God, he could actually win the whole thing. But he failed to pivot. All he had to do after he clinched the Republican nomination, all he had to do was say, I don't hate Mexicans. Mexicans who come here legally and become citizens, I love them. I want to be their president too. I just don't want illegal immigration. If he'd just done a few things like that to reassure the center that, oh yeah, I was sort of extreme for the Republican nomination, but don't worry. As president, I will be responsible. That's all he had to do, and he could have won because Hillary is such a weak candidate. But it's now clear he can't do that. He is who he is. He's a narcissist with no fixed ideas of, well, I shouldn't say that, but he's a narcissist who is not capable of basically being president. I'm pretty confident he will not win.
Okay.
Everyone's been wrong so far. All right.
He said, we love the well-educated, we love the poorly educated. So that's a good line.
Yeah.
In politics, you describe left and right as sort of yin and yang.
Yes.
Isn't that just old-fashioned triangulation? I mean, politicians like Bill Clinton or Tony Blair, they figured it out long ago.
I think it's different.
Skillful liars.
So triangulation is a thing, is a strategy that a person or party will do as a strategy. So but what I'm talking about is you have complex systems that cannot be managed or run, and these complex systems will tend to go one way, and as they go one way, they create more of a counter-reaction that strengthens the more they go this way, and that will eventually bring them back. So I think we had such nightmares of nationalism in the mid-20th century, and that led to this globalist, internationalist, transnational, nations are bad, countries are bad, borders are bad, EU. So that was a reaction to Hitler, and that went too far, frankly. I think it would be a disaster to have a global state. I think it would be a disaster to have a European state, frankly, if you lost your...
It's not in the cards right now,
yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let's get our panel on board now. Lotta.
I think I'm here. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Lotta, du är nummer 3 därifrån och Johan är nummer 4 där. Ja. Okay. Welcome. So here we have from your left Aida Hadzialic, Swedish Minister for Upper Secondary School and Adult Education. We have Magnus Henrekson, Professor and Managing Director at IFN, the Research Institute of Industrial Economics. We have Johan, Hakelius, Editor-in-Chief at Fokus, and a self-confessed conservative, if I'm not mistaken. Lotta Gröning, historian with a labor leaning. We agreed on that description. You're also a columnist at the liberal paper Expressen, and Professor Jonathan Haidt. So thank you all for being here. We couldn't wish for a more qualified panel on this subject, I think. Aida Hadzialic, if I may start with you. What's your reaction to Professor Haidt's message in relation to the challenges that your government and the European Union is facing now?
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank Professor Haidt.
Over here.
Oh, there. For a very interesting book, which kept me awake during a flight to California last week. It was very interesting. And I think it's very important to actually have the link between psychology and politics, because it's not a very common link that we see in a way in my ordinary life, that we analyze things from that perspective, but I think it's needed. So the challenges for our government, I would take a macro view on it. If we look at how the development has been for Sweden, at least during the last couple of years, both when it comes to this government and former government, I would say that the overall development has been very good, especially looking at it from the chart you were presenting before with the 3 steps about prosperity, immigration, and the core values. So we had a macro development where the growth was good, economic development was good, everything was going well. At the same time, we have a situation where a lot of people feel that nothing is going in the right direction. I think if you ask the majority of the Swedish people out there, they would say that the country is going straight to somewhere. And we have to ask ourselves, what's that due to? And I believe that it's coming back to the emotions you were talking about. It's fear. Fear about how the world is developing. We have wars, we have terrorism, which is actually hitting the core of Europe, but also Sweden. I think many people fear that part. We have people coming in, an influx of people due to the wars and conflicts, which we're seeing. We have the biggest immigration crisis since the Second World War. 60 million people all across the globe are fleeing somewhere due to problems. And a lot of them have come to Sweden, chosen Sweden, probably on one hand due to the prosperity and the good standard of living which we're exhibiting, but also, of course, due to the liberal mindset we've had when it comes to immigration. I think we need to, as a government, really need to address the emotions the people out there are feeling, because there's evidently a very conservative stream or a mindset across the population where we know that approximately 70% of the people simply want to address the question of immigration because they feel that the core values which Sweden stands for, that's being lost, and they feel afraid of what's going to happen in the future due to that factor. So I think we as a government, we on one hand, we need to keep focusing on the prosperity. We also need to focus on redistribution. I represent a social democratic government, so of course that's also an important part, and I would actually like to add it to the chart because I think that could decrease the feeling of fear out in society. But we also really need to put an emphasis on the part that in Sweden we have a Swedish model, as this government tends to talk about, and that Swedish model is both a matter of policies where we focus on economic growth and welfare, but it's also about Swedish core values, which are that we believe in democracy, we believe in equality, we believe in gender equality, we believe in the individual to set itself free, we believe in responsibility as well as rights, and you need to combine those and keep those balanced, because you can't just have rights, you also have obligations and your own individual responsibility both towards your own future but also the society. And as a government, we really need to pinpoint that, because otherwise we're going to have a continuous situation where people feel, despite the fact that the macroeconomic, again, development is going well, people will still feel that something is wrong here. My individual future is threatened, and we see that quite evidently in the Swedish everyday political life.
Is that how you interpret the Brexit result as well? Were you surprised by that, and what conclusions do you think that European politicians should draw from that?
I think generally we have the same situation in Sweden and the UK and maybe the United States. I think the difference, however, would be that and this is my very convinced opinion, is that due to the redistribution policies we've had over the years with the welfare state, I think our development towards extremism and populism has been slowed down because people haven't felt that their own situation has been under impact due to immigration up until now. Whereas in Britain or in the States, you have an enormous class division where people have felt this for a very long time. And in Sweden, due to the fact that we've also had a growing inequality at the same time as we've had, the most liberal migration policies in the entire EU, that together has given us a populist extremist party now, which is about 17%. Mm-hmm. And actually, when I look back at what my dissenters did, like Göran Persson, as we know. I mean, he was very keen on pinpointing both the fact that we need economic development, we need welfare, but he also, together with the biggest conservative party, Moderaterna, they had regulated migration up until 2006, basically. And that kept Sverigedemokraterna extremely low. And that policy, that affects Sweden, and I think it also affects the development of the EU.
You wrote an article a couple of months ago that received a lot of praise, where you challenged the so-called identity politics, that we should focus more on social cohesion and unity instead of things that set people apart ethnically. That aligns rather well with the message from Professor Haidt, right?
Well, I'm not sure. How would you go about encouraging this cohesion? What does that mean?
Well, the reason why I addressed that problem, that topic, was because I have had a feeling for a long time that we divide our policies, but also perhaps the ideology behind it, or most certainly the ideology behind it, based on who we see as the most suppressed groups. And due to the identity politics, it's very generalizing. But in many cases, we talk about people who are socially oppressed together which color of the skin they have, that they are the most oppressed people out there, and therefore we, especially as the left, we have to help them. Mm-hmm. And that's the way to create equality. But the problem is that with that point of view, you miss out on the majority of the society, because we have a lot of people in Sweden who are hit by the development of urbanization, the demographic development, the rural areas which feel they're left behind. And when you only talk about the suburbs and their challenges, you make a lot of people feel alienated. Mm-hmm. And I think as a social democrat, but I think that most parties would actually agree on that. We need general reforms. We need an ideology which talks about the whole country, mm-hmm. about all of its people, about the social cores, which are common ground to our nation. We need to build a national identity, which is there for everybody and includes all of us, which doesn't divide us based upon our the color of our skin, based upon where we're born, based upon what gender you are, based upon your sexual orientation, and so on.
You agree with that, I suppose?
Okay. Yes, now it's sounding much better to me. For a moment I was afraid, because what often happens on the left is people love the John Lennon song, Imagine. Imagine there's no countries, no gods, just all the people living life in peace.
I loved it until I read your book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, I now hate that song, I've got to say. It's beautiful, but it's a recipe for anomie and for a right-wing reaction. So the fact that you specifically said it's identity politics, which is divisive, and that you need to forge a common identity, that's great. The one thing I would ask you is, will that common identity clearly be Swedish, talking about what an extraordinary nation Sweden is, one of the greatest nations in history in its accomplishments, which include equality and all the good left-leaning values? Will it involve the Swedish flag and Swedish holidays, or will it try to accommodate, well, Muslim immigrants have these holidays and these will it be a multicultural new identity, or will it be Sweden, welcome to Sweden, we'd love to have you as being Swedish, let's try to make everybody Swedish?
A very short answer. What's going to be the glue here?
My point of view is that it needs to be based on Swedish tradition, Swedish culture, and Swedish values, the way we know them from the past.
Great.
Thanks. That's a very straight answer.
Yeah. But just I want to point out, that's Karen Stenner's advice. That's exactly what it was. And very few people on the left are willing to take that. So I applaud you for doing that.
Thank you.
Exactly. That's why this article raised some eyebrows, I think. Let's move to Professor Magnus Henrekson. From your point of view as an economist, what are the most important lessons that you learned from Professor Haidt's research and observations?
Yeah, first, it's one of those books when after you read it, you see the world differently, and you can't help doing that. So, and this happens very seldom, even if you read many books. why did Sweden become so large with such a large welfare state? I would say that it was built on the principle of reciprocity. Old social democrats used to say, do your duty, demand your rights. You have to do your duty 1 millisecond before you demand your rights. And this is the very idea of reciprocity. Otherwise, you cannot have like 60% of GDP in government spending. And people have to feel obligated. Some people want to use their life running this system, being a policeman, being a social secretary, being a good teacher, and so on. And now we see that people feel that this is changing, and it was changing already in the 1970s when you were given transfer payment. We didn't really check whether people were ill or whether they were not ill. People are now cheating on the Swedish SAT scores and get into the university where they shouldn't. I'm extremely upset by this, but our politicians are not that upset. Maybe a little bit upset, but it's not that bad. Yeah, and there is cheating and great inflation, and this means, of course, that we're creating a generation of cheaters, because if you're not a cheater, you don't get into medical school. So that's what the leading elites, that's how they want us to be. And of course, this goes totally against the reciprocal principle that made it possible to build this welfare state in the first place. So we're undermining it at a very rapid rate, and I'm alarmed by our politicians when they read about cheating, when they read about organized crime, and when they read about people don't want to be a pharmacist in a small town and so on, and doctors demanding 3 times the pay in order to be for a week in Lapland or someplace.
Do you see any solutions to that in Professor Haidt's observations?
Sure. I mean, reciprocity and fairness in the sense of meritocratic fairness, we have to come back to that. You cannot have like people who feel that they grew up in a small town, they paid taxes, they worked all their lives, and then you have lots of immigrants coming in, and all of a sudden their kids cannot go to the dentist, their mother and father cannot get any elderly care. This is not what the social contract looked like. I mean, you cannot introduce, like increase population by 20% in a small town and without having the resources for the more dentists, more schools and so on. So this is a breach of the social contract. It's so flagrant that of course many people react and you get enormous conflicts. And if you live, it's only people who live in central Stockholm, in the inner city of Stockholm, they are not affected, but they are the ones on TV who write out all the prescriptions and know exactly what should be done, and who are lecturing these people whose kids will not get to the dentist anymore.
You mentioned fairness. According to Jonathan, fairness and care are the values that liberals are obsessed with.
Well, fairness as a quality. He's talking about fairness as proportionality.
I know what he means. But whereas conservatives, they also look at things like loyalty, sanctity, and authority, right? That's almost what you're saying, that these traditional conservative values should be more at play here as well? Or?
Yeah, but redistribution, I mean, we have a system with a lot of redistribution, but it's an enormously delicate balance. People do accept redistribution if you think it's fair that these people are actually unprivileged and they need it, they couldn't do any better. But you expect them to try, but if you're given it without asking anything from these people because you victimize them in the first place, of course, that system will break down in the end. Aida, you're one of the first politicians, I would say, no matter whether you're moderate or social democrat, who are actually speaking openly about this, and it's very important, and hopefully your colleagues can start doing that also, because otherwise we will continue to undermine the system that we actually built and say that we care so much about.
Right. And part of this problem might be what we talked about as post-truth politics and relativism. What can economists like yourself contribute with there if we have this huge emphasis on emotion and a lack of facts in the political debate?
I mean, economists are now trying to introduce morality as a factor of production, that it's really important because people are not moral, they start cheating, and then we have to start building systems with cameras everywhere, monitoring, and you have to leave digital traces of everything that you do so you cannot cheat. But of course, in a complex society, there will always be opportunities for cheating, so people need to be reasonably innately moral in order for a complex society to work, and people are beginning to look at that. And then, of course, there's a traditional stuff that economists do showing that incentives matter. If you're paid as much calling sick, and you can call sick, you decide yourself, then after 10 to 15 to 20 years, people will start calling sick at a very high rate. And this is what happened in the 1980s. We changed the system, and people started calling sick less. Now, people believe that we can just increase sick leave payment again because, look, people don't call sick so much.
There's stuff for another seminar there.
Yeah, sure.
So you can't answer. I don't. Okay, let's move to you, Hakelius. You wrote a column the other day where you described the Brexit as a well-deserved slap in the face on arrogant European elites, I think. Do you agree with Jonathan Haidt on the moral psychology at play here?
Well, yes, I would say so in a broad sense. I think the problem in Europe, it's not really a European problem, it's a general problem. I think the concept of moral capital, I think, is very helpful. Because if you believe that societies are built on moral capital, you could say that we've been living on credit for quite a long time. I think one of the most interesting things about this book is that it really highlights the basis of societies and the basis of collective decisions. And the basis of that is not the actual hands-on institutions like the parliament or government in any sense. It's what the parliament is based on itself. And I think the problem we have in Europe in general is that, to take Brexit as an example, there is no demos in Europe. There never has been, and it's very hard to imagine one. There is, to put it simpler, no European tribe. And that makes it almost impossible to do collective decisions in the way that you would do in a nation state, for example.
But is there an American tribe?
Yes, there is. There is. And but what's happening at the same time, I mean, it's not all about the EU. What's happening at the same time, what we're watching now is that the tribal structures that we have based our collective decisions on earlier are also falling apart. The nation states are also falling apart. Look at Spain. Look at Britain. In a certain sense, look at America. I mean, the tribe of America has been, in general, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. There won't be a majority for much longer. Their culture might be dominant still, but things are happening there too. So, I mean, the basis of our collective decisions are falling apart, and the EU is not the cause of this, but the EU hasn't helped any. It has, all this talk about an ever closer union has, on the contrary, triggered all these things that we've seen today in Brexit. I'm not happy about Brexit, but I spoke about Brexit. You never want to say, I said so. But 20 years ago in Svenska Dagbladet, I wrote about the euro, and I said, this is what's going to happen. It's going to tear the European Union apart, and that's exactly what's going on now.
One of the observations in the book, The Righteous Mind, is that conservatives are more broad-minded than liberals. I suppose you agree with that.
Well, have a broader moral palate. That's a little different.
A wider diet. Or
yes,
something
okay.
like that.
I think in general it's right. I mean, there's lots of narrow-minded conservatives, even though they have a broader palate. But I mean, these values, loyalty, sanctity, authority, that are missing out in many of the liberal mindsets, that they're missing out in their mindsets doesn't mean that their politics are building on the same values too. That's exactly what I mean when I'm talking about living on credit. I mean, you take advantage of those values without recognizing them. And I think in that sense, yes, conservatives have a broader view because they recognize that their views and their ideas of how society works are based on those kinds of values.
Right, so let's move to the left now. Lotta,
To the left, yeah.
Lotta, you are-
Once upon a time.
I've seen you with Jonathan's book in your
Yeah,
pocket
I
for
work
some
with
time
it
now.
every day.
So I suppose you are rather in tune with what Jonathan is saying.
Yeah, it gave me a lot because I have worked with politics for many, many years now. And in the beginning, and when I wrote my PhD, it was about the Social Democratic Party. And I wrote about how they grown, how they got a power in the society before everyone have the right to vote. And then they work with the elephants, if you understand what I mean. They listen to the people they want to go to them. And they have a polity for everyone, for small business, for wife at home, for unemployed, for big companies, but not the very, very big, because they was the big threat, you know. And then they formed this policy about this folkhem, you know, the people's home that we have no, here we are all the same. And it was very good for
The welfare state.
the welfare state, yeah. It was good for up to the 60s, I think. And today, when the government are talking about the Swedish model, I used to think, is it one with blue eyes and blonde hair only today? I don't know, people don't know really what the Swedish model is any longer. And now I also see that we have some democratic problems because the leadership in the political parties, it doesn't matter who, is it the Social Democratic or is it the Conservative parties, they don't solve any problems anymore, and they cannot talk to each other. And I like that, you know. I have wrote a lot of Michaels. Do you know? I dropped the name about the iron law of oligarchy. Do you know that?
What's the iron law of oligarchy? Is this from Plato? What is it?
No, it isn't. It is that if you say organization, you say oligarchy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same that when the leadership start to build a party, for example, suddenly, it was you say in your book also, they got a little group.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, and they, when they recruit members, they recruit loyal people who say, oh, you're very good, this politics is very good, and they disappear from the elephants out there. They're not there.
So you're saying the Social Democratic Party used to be a very skillful party that listened to people, understood their intuitive motives, and you think it's evolved to become more of an oligarchy that does not understand the common people?
They don't understand it, and they is not so very interested in it. It's more like a business trip. I can still hear them say, oh, we shall create all the jobs. If you vote for us, you got this and this. Yeah. You have that. They have become an elite who live in their own world. And also the other political parties, because, for example, when we got the Swedish Democrats Party, you know, the one who don't like immigrants so very much, then they did create a democracy by their own. They do something called December Agreement. And then they decide that they shall only vote if the Conservative Party decided what the Social Democratic government what they did, they shall vote on it. Or it doesn't matter. They shall always stand up because no one wants to cooperate with this Swedish Democratic Party. And the democracy and the elephants out there disappear. No one talked to them. And they got angry because in Sweden we believe in democracy. And I think democracy also is moral. And when they don't care about it and don't listen to the people,
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can I get back to Aida Hadzialic about this disconnect between politicians and voters that Lotta is talking about? Do you see that as well when we talk about integration, for instance?
Well, first of all, I have to disagree on the statement that politicians are an elite. I wouldn't call myself an elite. I mean, I'm a person who's struggled all my life, and people believe that well, I was 27 when I became minister, saying, oh, that's an overnight success. But believe me, I've had many sleepless nights to get there. Worked a lot. And I think most people who actually engage in politics, that they've tried to change the world to the better. I hope that that's the inner motivation for most of us. So, well, and then there are exceptions, but that's what they are. And I think that we do solve problems, not all problems, but given the fact, again, look at the economic development of Sweden, look at the employment rates. I think they're going in the right direction. I can give credit both to the former government and I can give credit to us because we've together created something in that direction, and we're now trying to solve the welfare issues which we have. The problem is, however, again, I think that what we've been missing out on explicitly is the common ideology of the country. And that's what this book and the professor's theories are about. How do we create a common sense that this is our Sweden? That we together have the core values which all of us can subscribe to, which the kids will learn in the kindergartens, which will follow them through education, because sometimes we say education is solution. And education is a solution maybe to the productivity levels and the economic development, but how can education be the solution to the common social development which we'll have? And that's where psychology and the moral parts are very important. And I think that as a social democratic representative, we need to go back to the core. What's the driving force, the ideological driving force of this country, which will unite all of us, no matter if we're social democrats or conservatives. And I think one of those things is, as was pointed out here, that you have your duties and obligations, you also have your rights. And with that balance comes welfare, comes economic productivity, comes prosperity, comes, well, our overall standard of living, which we're so very proud of, and that's what we call the Swedish model. So I mean, the Swedish model is both the concrete policies which we've been adapting from both the political side and when it comes to business and unions, but also the historical values which have shaped this country, ideology.
Right. And Magnus, when you read The Righteous Mind, do you see any obvious misconceptions in the Swedish political discourse, for instance, on integration?
I mean, I agree with Aida that our problem is of the way forward, but the problem is, of course, that we're not very good at making people productive citizens if you come from a very different culture with very, very little training. The difference in employment rate is about 30 percentage points between those who have parents where both your parents were born in Sweden and those who are foreign born, in 30 percentage points. It's enormous.
And what's the psychological background to that?
Yeah, I mean, we help, of course, a lot of people coming here, they get full access to our economy. And in order for them, what they want, of course, as fast as possible, is to be able to pay back. And we have created a society where it's going to be very impossible for many of them ever to pay back and restore the emotional balance, and that they don't have to feel gratitude, they have paid back. And if you can't pay back, what do? You start disliking those your benefactors, because that's the only way to restore your emotional balance. And we see this happening in many of the suburbs, in 59 areas where the police can't get in, and I think that's really what's happening there.
But that's the psychology on the recipient side, so to speak. But what's the political psychology that creates this problem of integration then?
I mean,
why do we stick to the welfare state when it's not working in this sense?
I mean, the elite that's their business idea. Whether they are left-wing or right-wing, I mean, the conservatives took over and they were basically saying they are the good administrators of this welfare state. On the other hand, if you are conspiratorial, you can say that Friedrich Reinfeldt, he introduced rules that were totally inconsistent with that model, as you said. So maybe he had a plan that we don't know about, but we'll never know. But to me, this is mysterious. I can't understand it.
The voters denied him the chance to show it, the plan, I mean.
Yeah.
Okay, let's open up for questions, if you have something on your righteous mind. Yes, just 1 second and you'll get a microphone.
Hello, my name is Valdemar Ingdahl. Interesting discussion. But I have a thought that I've developed from an article in the Weekly Standard some years ago. Namely, the problem that today we're trying to explain opinions, sociological trends with psychology and evolution. And isn't there a problem that today we're trying to explain away very real clashes of interests and well-developed ideas in our societies as some sort of variation of psychological and evolutionary types? After all, fear doesn't spread on itself. It needs its harbingers.
You know, that's an excellent question. What I'm observing in social psychology, where everybody's on the left, is that people try to explain away conservative beliefs by looking at how often kids were spanked or things like that. So there is an effort, a partisan effort sometimes, to explain why those people believe such stupid things because of some other thing, so we don't have to take their ideas seriously. So sometimes that is a problem. More broadly, as a social scientist, I am a really, really big fan of reductionism. You have to understand how our attitudes are based in the brain, how all of this comes from evolution, et cetera, et cetera. But what I keep telling my students is, if you're going to do reductionism, you must commit to emergentism as well, because the sociologists are right that there are emergent social structures and institutions. So reductionism is bad when it is done as a way to avoid engaging in the higher level constructs. But when you go both down and up, as I try to do in my books, then I think you get a fuller explanation. And as we saw in Nicholas's question about yin-yang, I don't try to explain away left and right. I do talk about the psychology that makes some people attracted to each side, but I take very seriously the idea that each of us can see part of the truth but not the whole truth, and it's only when you put us together that better policy, better thinking emerges. I do take, my own experience as somebody who's always on the left was that there was wisdom to be found on the right and among libertarians that I had not known before. And I think it's this interaction of conflicting views that actually leads us to the truth.
You describe in your book how you sort of broadened your mind with these conservative traits as well. Could it have something to do with the simple fact that you got older?
Yes, it could. And the fact that I became a parent. While I was writing the book, my second child was born. And you know, when your kids are 0 and 1, there's no need for discipline. But when they're 3 and 4, you suddenly have to become an authority. And it is, you know, people have found if you start a business or become a parent, that makes you more conservative.
And you appreciate loyalty more as well.
Yeah, I think so. That
in a way. Okay, next question.
Thank you for a great lecture and a great panel. My name is Carl Gruvman. And I must disagree a bit with Magnus Henrekson here. He said, I think you said that in Sweden we're not great at solving problems. I think that the Swedish political system is excellent at solving problems, technological or technocratic problems. We did enormous reforms in the financial systems in the 80s, an independent central bank in the 90s, great reforms in monetary policy. We did last year great migration reforms. We did a new agreement across the board within the energy system that was long overdue, but finally you managed to solve that. So in my view, we're excellent at those technocratic solutions, but we're really bad at, and almost in Paralympics, so to say, is about these moral issues. Whereas, for instance, the United States I think the political discussion is very much more about moral issues, philosophical issues. Every presidential election is about what is America going to be, what are the values that are that we cherish.
Thanks.
But we are not
That's an excellent
about that discussion here. And what do we need to do to bring up that discussion in Sweden that I think we need?
It's an excellent point. Maybe before you, maybe the Minister, Aida Hadzialic, could answer that briefly. I mean, are we that good at technocratic solutions, but a bit lost when it comes to morals and psychology?
Very good question, and that's my thesis as well, as I cleaned here before. I also think that overall we're quite good at solving problems, but our problem is the ideology again. How do we point out the course, the morals, and that's definitely an obligation of the politicians we have in Sweden right now and the future as well, to be better at pointing out those more philosophical issues and not only talking about how many % more somebody's get from something. I think it was a very clever illustration of how things can be and shouldn't be.
So what should we do?
Well, so it's interesting that both of your comments just now are basically saying Sweden is very good at solving non-wicked problems, but it's bad at solving wicked problems. But that's the definition of wicked. It's harder. So you're, so you're right. But compared to what? Compared to who? And this is what I think is just extraordinary about Sweden. Something, as I'm reading more about it, I think I was reading a report written for some World Economic Forum. I think this might have been by Lars Tregard and somebody else. Magnus, I think you or somebody sent it to me. At any rate, saying, what is the Nordic model of capitalism? What is the Nordic model? And what they said was unique and special about the Nordic countries was not that they had such a better system. It's that when crises hit, they actually got together and learned from the crisis and made changes that then made it less likely for that to happen again. And I read this and I was like crying, like, oh my God, if only my country could do that, So yes, wicked problems are harder, but I think Sweden has been extraordinary in actually being able to solve them. So I think you guys are amazing at solving problems. And it's in part because you're a small country without the enormous range of ideologies and groups that we have in America. And part of being a small country is that the human relations are much, much more important. This is our big problem in America, is that one of them is Congress people used to live in Washington, D.C. and know each other, and their wives and spouses and children all were socially connected, and they couldn't be too rude to each other. But that stopped in the 1990s. Now the congressmen don't even live there anymore. They just fly in 3 days a week. They don't bring their family. They don't know each other. There are no more human relations in the House of Representatives.
You blame Newt Gingrich.
Yes, that's right. Newt Gingrich caused that deliberately. He didn't want them to be friends with the other side. So I imagine you have a political class here in Stockholm. Everybody knows everybody. Yeah. You're all tied together, and that makes it easier for you to actually work together. So that's an enormous strength that you have here.
It's also a box to break out of sometimes. Johan.
Yeah. I think many of the things we're talking about now about the Swedish the good things and the bad things about solving problems in Sweden are answered by the World Value Systems survey. I mean, part of the problem when it comes to moral issues and so on is that many Swedes believe that morality and stuff like that, I mean, we left that behind us. Yeah. I mean, we're way past that. Yeah. We're more modern than that. We don't need that. So that's why we have a problem when we end up in situations like this that we are in now, where we have to kind of retie the ties to our tribal past, in a sense. And we've been able to do that because it's been very strong. It's been very strong, and we haven't even had to think about it. The fact that Sweden has been a very tightly knit society. But now we need to think about it again, and we don't really have the tools to do it. So that's what we're trying to do now.
Right. Magnus Henrekson, being the organizer here today, you will get the final word now.
Yeah, so I think one problem we have, I mean, there was, we got this enormous crisis in the early 1990s, and people have forgotten that at that time it didn't really pay to work for many people. And then, of course, morals changed, that if it didn't pay to work, so if society didn't signal that it's important that you are a contributor to building this society in a legitimate job, and then this changed. And then we started reforming, in the way, as you said, we started reforming these systems. And the alliance in 2006-2014, they continued that by introducing earned income tax credit, and social assistance was not increased so much and so on. But the only argument they used was that it should pay to work relative to living on transfers. What they should have said, of course, is that the only way we as a government can signal to you that we want you to be a person that's taking part in building this society is by making it profitable to work relative not to work. But if you can't work, and we see that you can't work because you have a disability or something, we will of course take care of you generously. But for moral reasons and for your own sake, you should be a contributor to the society. But they didn't say that. They say the only reason to work is because it pays better than living on transfer payment. And of course, the moral of that means that new government comes in, they start reversing all these things because now we can afford to partly reverse it. But it was not the reason why it was introduced. And Borg and Reinfeldt didn't understand that because they probably read too many mainstream economics books. At least one of them had.
Thank you very much, Magnus. You have a very good saying in your book, dynamism with decency. That might be a slogan we could all agree upon. We could call it the height of morals, perhaps, or Haidtism. Something like that. Our time is up now, but thank you so much for broadening our minds today. And